The Vietnam War is often regarded as a prime example of David versus Goliath, with an ill-equipped guerrilla force prevailing against the might of the US Army. However, the Vietnamese certainly weren't alone in their struggle, as over the years they received stocks of weapons, equipment and advisors from allies like China, the Soviet Union and Sweden. But one of their biggest fortunes actually came from one of their wartime enemies, Imperial Japan. Or more specifically, hundreds of Japanese army deserters who became soldiers, advisors and commanders to the Vietnamese in the early days of their resistance, and essentially built their army from the ground up, helping to pave the way for Vietnam's success against not one, not two, but three superpowers. So how and why did soldiers of a fascist army join a communist rebel group? And why would these rebels accept them? After all, it's no secret that the Imperial Japanese Army committed some of the most horrific crimes against humanity, and their conduct in Vietnam was no exception. As the first country to fall to the Japanese war machine, Vietnam endured a brutal occupation for most of the Second World War, which culminated in a devastating famine with around 2 million civilians starving to death. In fact, it was Japan's cruel regime that created the rebel movement, better known as the League for Independence of Vietnam, or Viet Minh, who were determined to expel these foreign invaders from their country. However, Japan wasn't their only enemy, as back then, Vietnam was part of France's colonial empire, who'd ruled them with an iron fist for nearly 6 decades. In fact, the day Japan surrendered, the Viet Minh stormed the capital city of Hanoi and declared Vietnam an independent country. But while these rebels had a strong, passionate following, they were ultimately a ragtag force that lacked any serious firepower experience, as evidenced by their unsuccessful guerrilla war against Japan. So when the French began deploying their vast international army to re-establish their control, the Viet Minh promptly fled into the jungles. The Japanese soldiers stationed in Vietnam, meanwhile, were left in a quandary. The Allies had given them a 1-month grace period before they disarmed their soldiers, leaving them with 2 options. 1. Abandon their posts and head into the jungles in search of the Viet Minh, or 2. Return home in defeat and disgrace, and potentially face a trial for any atrocities they'd committed. Of course, not all of these defectors were war criminals trying to escape persecution. In fact, 80% of them had Vietnamese wives or girlfriends, along with children, and refused to abandon them. Others, like Major Ikawa and Private Haruyoshi Matsushima, genuinely sympathized with the Viet Minh's cause and wanted to help liberate their Asian brethren from Western colonialism. Major Ikawa had even secretly conducted non-aggression pacts with the Viet Minh and used his position to requisition thousands of weapons for them from his brigade's headquarters, giving these rebels a huge boost in firepower. In total, it's believed that around 800 Japanese servicemen joined the Viet Minh, many of whom were mid or high-ranking officers who brought a handful of infantry with them, who were promptly given new Vietnamese names to help cement their transition. Their first order was to improve the caliber of the Viet Minh soldiers. To this end, 8 Japanese officers came together to form Vietnam's first military school, the Quang Nhai Military Academy. Now, admittedly, this academy was just a collection of ramshackle bamboo huts that only existed for 6 months, but it gave around 500 cadets an impressive crash course in Japanese tactics. Students were taught how to march, build entrenchments, and conduct ambushes and night raids, along with combat skills like gun handling, bayoneting, grenade throwing, hand-to-hand combat, and all-out shooting, the practice of intercepting low-flying aircraft with rifles and machine guns. Training weapons and ammo were in short supply though, to the point where students were sometimes taken on combat missions. None of this seemed to deter these cadets though, many of whom became influential leaders within the Vietnamese army, like Colonel Lê Xuan Kien, General Commander of Vietnam's Tank Corps, or Nguyen Cac Huan, the battalion officer turned diplomat who helped broker peace between Vietnam and America in the 70s. Some alumni even set up training institutions within their regiments and battalions, based on the teachings of their Japanese masters, further spreading their doctrine throughout the Viet Minh. Shortly after the academy was disbanded, some of its instructors became high-ranking officials within the Viet Minh. Lieutenant Mitsunobu Nakahara served in their general headquarters as a consultant for the legendary General Nguyen Giap, the co-founder of the Viet Minh, while Major Ishii Takuo, the youngest officer in the Japanese army, became the chief advisor to the Viet Minh's forces in the south. Those who lacked any technical expertise, meanwhile, were tasked with more practical jobs. Some, like Suzuki Choji and Kasumi Akasaka, worked in underground workshops producing weapons and medical equipment, while others fought alongside the Viet Minh. Koshiro Iwai led a sophisticated reconnaissance campaign that included spies, radio interception, and ambushes along the infamous Highway 4, aka the Road of Death, while one soldier known as Yasuda destroyed 2 French vehicles with a bazooka during the Battle of Hanoi, before being cut down in the crossfire, earning him the name Ho Chi Tam in honour of the Viet Minh's glorious leader, Ho Chi Minh. Yasuda wasn't the only defector to receive such a high accolade either, as over 30 Japanese ex-servicemen were awarded high-class distinctions for their contributions and services. As a result, the new Vietnamese became high-value targets to the French army, at a surprising success rate. The young Major Ishii was killed by a landmine during one battle, while Major Ikawa died when his convoy was ambushed by French troops in Pleiku. In any case, by 1947, the Viet Minh had a robust infrastructure in place that allowed them to conduct their operations more efficiently, thus granting them more victories against the French army. This, however, became something of a double-edged sword for the new Vietnamese, as the Viet Minh gradually realised they no longer needed them. By the 1950s, many were either retired or working in civilian roles, whether voluntarily or forcibly. Once France was defeated, the new communist government began repatriating them to Japan, often forcing them to leave their families behind. Others, however, were permitted to stay, like Suzuki Choji, who pursued his passion of martial arts to become the founder and father of karate in Vietnam. In any case, of the 800 defectors who joined the Viet Minh, around 130 of them survived the war and returned to Japan. However, their reintegration into society was difficult. Since they technically served for a communist state, the government placed them on watch lists, while most companies refused to hire them, causing many to work menial jobs to get by or fall into poverty. While some veterans have since regretted joining the Viet Minh, others, however, never lost their love for Vietnam, as they'd set up numerous organisations like the Japan-Vietnam Trade Association or the Vietnam Friendship Society to help reunite them with their families and foster positive relations between the two countries. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all well and good, but did any Japanese defectors fight in the other Vietnam War against America? And the answer to that is maybe. While most were getting quite old by the mid-60s, I did find one declassified CIA report that claims a Japanese officer did serve as an instructor for the Viet Cong. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, a notoriously anti-American commander who orchestrated several massacres throughout the Pacific Theater. Details about his contributions are slim though, and he went missing shortly after travelling to Laos. To this day, his fate remains unknown. There may well have been other Japanese soldiers who stayed the course. After all, some held out till the 70s, but I couldn't find anything. However, the Japanese weren't the only foreign fighters the Viet Minh recruited, as they also received hundreds of white soldiers who were deserting the French army. We'll explore all this next time though, so stay tuned for more content. And if you know something I don't, leave a comment below.